you, Dennis. Hey, as we get started, if there's any kids taking up a seat that an older person could use, then get those kids up and set them down somewhere else.
On the floor.
They're bringing up some more chairs here as well. Hey, I want to thank everybody for coming. My name is Clark Poos, and it's my privilege tonight to have put this thing together. It's been a lot of fun. I'm on the board of the Collegiate Peaks Forum Series, and it's been a great, that's a great bunch of folks that are bringing people from outside our area in here to talk. The next person we have coming is Temple Grandin. I mean, we're bringing a lot of neat people in. But I started thinking that we got some, no offense there, Chuck, he's the youngster here. We got some old timers right under our noses with a lot of great stories to tell. And we need to be celebrating these folks right here in our own valley. You don't have to sit on the floor, Chuck.
I do, you gotta get me up. I do, you gotta get me up.
That's right.
That's the problem.
So that's how this all came about. I just decided to get on the phone and call some of these folks up, and you know, not a single one turned me down. Everybody said that they'd be happy to be part of it, except, well, Jake Foreman said that he would love to have been part of it, except for the fact that he was afraid he'd start a story and couldn't finish it. And so that's one of the reasons that we're here tonight, is to celebrate you folks, to hear your old stories about this area here and such. I want to thank the Heritage Museum for giving us this place to do it. MK Photography, which is Mike and Karen Campbell out of Nathrop, our newcomers to the area. In a way, I guess they've got folks here, but they're doing the filming on this so that we can take this and make a DVD out of it for later, so that we can help to support the Heritage Museum here. Renee Grainer, where are you? Baby Doe Studios is taking pictures tonight. And just want to thank all the people that went into helping to make this happen. So we've got an all-star cast here tonight. We've got Joe Kogan, Cliff Pierce, Frank McMurray, Susie Kelly, Ada Morrison, Betty Farrington, and Chuck Noctree. Doesn't get any better than that. I heard that Joe Kogan could single-handedly hog the whole night. I brought a lariat, just in case he gets too long-winded, then we'll have to rope him in. If any of these guys go much longer, in about 15 minutes, we're just going to have to bring the rope out on him. But anyways, it's my pleasure to introduce Joe Kogan.
You're saying the president by standing up there, Joe.
I'm known as a Nathrop windbag, so they will shut me off, probably drag me off with a rope. It's an interesting thing. A thread of a rope was the reason the Kogans came to this valley. My grandfather belonged to the White Boys in Ireland. They were the resistance to the British. And they had one stock in trade, and that was to take a lever and a fulcrum and take bridges out. All the bridges in Ireland are made with Roman arch, because rock is the only thing they have to build with. And they bragged that they could take any bridge in Ireland out in 2 minutes flat by lifting the keystone and letting it cave in. For that, there was a death penalty. My grandfather heard he had been turned in by a neighbor, and he saw the soldiers coming. So he told Grandma he would go out the back door, and she would hear from him in America. They came to the neighbor's place that had turned him in and marched the neighbor away instead of my grandfather. and we presume that that he protested that he was not Jeremiah Cogan until a rope tightened on his neck, because he was never heard from again. But it became too hot for him, for my grandfather, and he came steerage to America and came to the metropolis of Nathrop, Colorado, where there were some of these terrible people like Knockreed and Feeling and so forth. But my grandfather, being a poor Irishman, didn't have anything to start with, so he worked for some years on the Rio Grande Railroad, which was narrow gauge and came by where our present house is, by the road. My grandfather found a calf by the road. It had a broken leg. So he felt sorry for it and took it back to Nathrop at the chance of getting hung by one of the Knockreeds or Feeling or someone. And he nursed it back to health. The calf would jump in front of the engines when they'd stop for water. They had to stop at a certain line. The calf would jump in front of the engine and shake its head and threaten it, and indeed the engine would stop every time. But the calf got to be everybody's pet. And my grandmother ran the boarding house, and the calf got to going in the dining hall and doing what calves do best on the floor. She gave my grandfather the ultimatum: either the calf leaves or you and the calf leave in a box. Knowing she was a determined old biddy, he went up the railroad 3 miles where he knew there was an old rancher down up there that had homesteaded in 1872, and he bought 120 acres and homesteaded 40, and we still have his original patent for the 40 acres that he homesteaded. He didn't get much in the cattle business right away, but my father was 11 when I believe he was 11 when he bought the ranch. No, he'd have to be a little older than that. But my father did the ranching, my father and my uncle. And it's been good to us. The neighbors haven't hung us yet. But we had one lady from the south that came from the south. And you know how the South people are. They have terms that they use. And she made the remark that Cogans were just some po' white trash that moved in here and we can't chase them out. And we kind of enjoy being po' white trash in this country. In the dining hall where my aunt worked there at Nathrop, she decided to get highbrow, and she made cream puffs for the section hands, the people that worked on the railroad, the laborers. They gave one man one, didn't explain to him what it was. He took a bite out of it, he jumped up, ran out the door and spit it out. And he said, "That damn biscuit's raw in the middle." We get to rustling occasionally. My first thought comes to Mr. Otto Frisky. Otto Frisky was the only man ever prosecuted for stealing cattle in Chaffee County. He lived at the base of Mount Princeton. And they ran him up on charges. They caught him twice with the neighbor's cattle in 1 week. So they decided they better do something. So he ended up in Canyon City. My father went to visit him in Canyon City. And he said to my father, "Jack, I've rustled Feeling's cattle, I've rustled Knockreed's cattle, I've rustled cattle from about everybody in this valley. But by God, those two that they stuck me on were planted. I didn't rustle those." Well, my ring here tells me it's about 15 minutes, so I better, no? A little bit more?
Are you the timekeeper, Susie?
We see people hurt on horses all the time. And it's a new thing, this people being hurt on horses. My father lived here for 83 years, he never saw a man hurt on a horse. On roundup, he'd seen horses killed under him by being gored with horns. He's seen them break their nerves jumping a gully and break them in two. Seen real accidents, but he never saw a man hurt. He did have a friend that was commonly called Tobacco Juice. Tobacco Juice joined the roundup at 13, and he had a leather jacket. And that's all he wore, summer and winter, was a leather jacket. He chewed tobacco, and he couldn't spit clear. It always dribbled down the front. So they named him Tobacco Juice until the day he died. One of the last things my dad said was, we went and visited him, and he said, I don't believe we're going to see old Tobacco Juice anymore.
But you're not going to tell us what his name really was?
His name was Charlie Matlock.
Oh, Matlock.
Yes. You knew him, you did too. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, Cliff Pierce.
Well, anyway, my name's Cliff Pierce, and our family moved here in 1935, and was in Buena Vista just a short time, and then we moved north up at Riverside, and my dad worked in the Lynn Hardy mine up there. And we've been in 2 or 3 different places up that way. And so anyway, then we moved back down here in Buena, and I think it was 39, I'm not sure. Pretty close to that. And then I started the school. And so anyway, there's a lot to tell about us, but I'm not going to tell everything. Thank you. Joe and I went to school together. And so anyway, I'm going to talk about an old timer here in Buena that was the town marshal. And his name was Charlie Tompkins. And he was a pretty nice fellow. So anyway, he did I'm sure most all of these old timers know who I'm talking about. So anyway, he was the town marshal, and he went and he had to do all of the police of the town, and then he went and he maintained the streets. They had no Austin Western motor grader, and he did most all of the streets. They were all dirt at that time. This was in the 40s, the early 40s, and so anyway, he dressed pretty decent, you know. I mean, he wasn't no sloppy marshal. He didn't wear a suit or anything, but he always wore a hat. Not similar to yours, but not quite. So anyway, he had this old I think it was a green 35 Ford pickup. It was a pretty nice looking little truck. And they had because back then, the town didn't furnish cars. They just, if you was a marshal, you had your own transportation. And he drove that little pickup all over and washed the town, you know, and there wasn't much killings or anything like that. Nothing like that going on at that time. But anyway, old Charlie was, he was a pretty nice guy, and he did all of that, and then he went and he maintained all the streets with this Austin Western motor grader. And then he went and, let's see, well, I guess they had a volunteer fire department back in those days. And one little old 1.5 ton Ford truck. It was about a 39, I think. And there wasn't maybe a couple ladders on it, and some hoses, and a few axes and stuff like that. And one little flashing light at the top. But anyway, Charlie, at night he would, he checked the town over real good, and the town had a curfew for the kids. And you weren't supposed to be out after 9 o'clock.
9 o'clock, did y'all hear that?
9 o'clock. No kids on the street after 9 o'clock. And if he'd seen any of them, he would send them home or tell them to go home, So anyway, some of us kids come up there and played in the park a little bit. And we try to stay a little longer than normal. And so Charlie would always go up and he'd come down Lake Street right to the park where the town lake is. And it's the north end on that side with pretty tall grass. And so we thought, well, we'll just fool him. We'll get down in that grass. I want him to see him coming. And he'd always come around the corner and shiny spotlight all around the whole park out in there, everywhere. Real slow. So we get down in there until he left. And then we'd stay a little bit longer, but not real late, So anyway, Charlie he'd do that every night. Every night he'd go around and make his rounds and do all of that. And so then, it was one evening, there was a fire, a house fire. And it was on, I don't know whether he's the one that turned on the siren or not, but on top of the city hall, right above the door, way up there on the roof, was this big tall siren for fire. And the city always blew that thing at noontime, to tell you that everybody knew it was noon. But anyway, so this fire happened at about, it was at night about, 9, it was already dark, 9 or 10. The fire was on North San Juan. And I think it was just past old Doc Close's house, which was, the house north of him was 129, I believe. They didn't have the numbers back those days. They didn't even have street names. They had them, but I never knew what they were except Main Street. But anyway, we lived on south San Juan at the time, and I was probably, at that time, around 12 or 13. And we heard the siren blowing, when everybody looking to see where the fire went, just like they do nowadays. And all we could see was this little red light up there on the street flashing like this. And there was an old man that lived in that house, I believe. And but anyway, there was a lot of smoke, and it didn't burn the house up, but the fire department got there, and after all of them got together, they all got over there with the truck. And I guess that there was a lot of smoke, so they needed some lights to see through the smoke so they could see if anybody else was in there. And so they sent Charlie back to the fire station to get they had a couple lights down there, I guess, that they forgot. And the fire station was down at the city hall, on the north side of the city hall. And the jail was in where they parked the truck. The city jail was. But anyway, Charlie took off and went down there, and when he come back, he didn't come back. He didn't come back right away, but he come back, and he didn't go in. And all of these, the fireman was wondering where he was at, so they went out to look. One of them did, and Charlie's pickup was sitting out there on the street, and Charlie was all slumped over the wheel. He'd had a heart attack. So that was, I don't know whether anybody ever remembers that or not. But
That was Lou Wade. That was Lou Wade that died in that.
was it Lou Wade?
In the fire?
Lou Wade, yeah.
In the fire?
Oh, I knew there was an old man in there, but I wasn't sure what his name was. Yeah. Yeah.
By the name of Lou Wade.
Lou Wade. But anyway, there was, but Charlie, he died at a young age. I mean, he was probably, I think he was probably in his about 58 or somewhere in that vicinity.
That's young.
Yeah, it was pretty young for them. And he had 3 other brothers too that they ranched around here a little bit. As a matter of fact, we lived on one of their Ernie Tompkins Ranch up north of town. And so that's about all I got to tell about Charlie, because that was the end of that.
Ladies and gentlemen, Frank McMurray.
Whoops, I don't have to talk into that, do I? I'm going to change the pace a little bit. I've been in the Nathan Valley all my life, but I'm going to tell a couple of stories that I hope are humorous. We can get into the history later. If I'm asked back, we can talk about the Lake County War and vigilante headquarters and the mill and all that stuff. But anyway, I was about 7, 8 years old. And they had a bunch of wild cattle running over there east of the river, over there in the Pinions. And they'd gotten all but 2 of those. There was a bull and there was a steer. Well, some of you old timers probably know the name of Stanley Mahan. He was forest ranger. He stopped at the house one day and talked Dad into going over there in the Pinions to go after that steer and that bull. And he had 2 30-30s and a box of shells. Dad was scared to death of a gun. I never saw him shoot a gun, didn't close both eyes. But anyway, they talked him into going, and Stanley took 1 30-30 and a half a box of shells and gave the other rifle and the other half a box of shells to Dad. They went across the river, forded the river, and they ran into that steer and that bull. Well, Stanley was a crack shot. He was the best. Of course, Dad was scared of a gun. But anyway, they started in after this steer and this bull, and they split up. And Dad told me that about 20 minutes later, he heard a shot. That's the only shot he heard. Well, he knew what a crack shot Stanley was, and he just knew Stanley got that bull. Well, Dad kept after that steer. He shot 9 times. All he did was knock the front dew claw off that steer. And he knew that he couldn't go back and tell Stanley that steer got away from him. Well, he was about a half a hand with a rope. He was left-handed. If there's anybody in the world that could screw up a lariat rope, it was him. Rope and left-handed. But anyway, he roped that steer, shot him between the eyes. Well, on another light note, I was a little kid at this time too. I was a little bit older. We were moving cattle along the highway up there where my youngest son lives there in that log house. Across from the red brick schoolhouse, there was Frank Feeling, Bill Dunlap, Glenn McMurray, and me. And we got out on the highway, and there was somebody along the road. Well, it was an old bum. That probably isn't politically correct for today, but he was still an old bum. But he was walking down the road, and he got out for us, and we went ahead and moved the cattle. And this was the first day of November, and I can't tell you what year, but we went ahead and moved the cattle over there to Chalk Creek. And anyway, we got a report that there was some cattle down on the river. Well, Jerry Cogan's had cattle down there. Jerry had cattle and Dad had cattle, and we went down there to take a look. And we were coming back up to the meadow, and Jerry had about a dozen kids. And the Cogans always lived on a lot of venison anyway, but anyway, we were riding past this haystack, and Dad told Jerry that he ought to do a better job of hiding his deer hides. Well, Jerry swore up and down that he wasn't hiding his deer hides there, but all of them made a lot venison in those days. But anyway, Dad said he didn't believe him, so they went over there. Well, this was 30 days after we'd been moving those cattle. Went over to that stackyard, and here was the dead man in it. A dead man, yes. Well, went ahead and went home. Dad called up for the sheriff. Well, the sheriff was out. Well, yeah, how about the undersheriff? No, the undersheriff wasn't there either. And he said, well, how about the coroner? Well, the coroner was unavailable too. And he said, can we help you? And he said, yes, I'd like to have somebody come up and pick up this dead man. About 30 minutes later, here came the state patrol and lights and sirens and the sheriff and the undersheriff and the coroner, the deputies, and in the rear was another state patrol. Well, I don't know whatever happened to that dead man, but don't know whether he died of a heart attack or whether he froze to death. But anyway, I was going to Gas Creek School at that time, and we had our Christmas programs over at the Nathrop Schoolhouse. And that was quite a gala affair. Well, Dad always kidded Vivian Cogan had given that bum a pint of warm milk and a cinnamon roll. Well, Dad kidded Vivian Cogan about what she gave that bum. He went down there and died. Well, anyway, we had our Christmas play over there. But he relentlessly kidded Vivian about what he'd done to that bum. Well, we had our Christmas play and our Christmas program, and Santa Claus came and they handed out all the gifts. Got all done. And lo and behold, there was one gift left. To Glenn McMurray from Santa Claus. It was a pint of milk and a dried out cinnamon roll.
We heard Joe Cogan talking about the Friskies, and when I first married Bryce, the Kellys leased the Frisky Ranch. This ranch is at the base of Mount Princeton, and they ran cattle up there, and they put me on a horse to help move the cattle up there, and Bryce would say, just stay on the horse, he knows what to do. That's how bad I was. But anyhow, when we used to go up there, the old guy that still was alive and ran the ranch, well, he didn't run it, but he lived there, was Gus Frisky. And this was when I was a very young person, like 19, 20. And believe it or not, that's the first time I took notes from some old timer. And I found those notes 30 years ago and said, oh my gosh, all this stuff Gus told me. And Gus had married when he was like 69 to a lady named Susie Giesel. She lived in town on Main Street, on the west end of Main Street, and Susie and Gus evidently didn't get along. I'm not sure why he married her, but I heard the quote from Joe said that Gus said she was the meanest old heifer he ever knew. Gus didn't tell me that, but Joe told me that he said that. Oh, he told Jay Foreman that too. But the story is that Gus and she never lived together. He did. After he married her, he took her out to the ranch, and he had about a 3-room log cabin with an attic upstairs. And he had an outhouse, and he had a pump for water outside. And I guess Susie took one look at that and said, I'm not going to live here. And she came back to town. So the story is that he stopped to see her every now and then as he went back to his ranch. Many years later, some man came into the museum in about 1978, and he said that he was Susie Giesel's son, not by Gus, that she had had this son. You know, she was probably 55 or 60. Did you ever hear that they had a son? Or that Susie did?
She had a son.
Yeah, Susie did. Okay, well, this guy came in the museum, and Giesel was the guy's name. So that was kind of interesting to have this man come in and, uh-oh, did I just turn off the microphone? Okay.
You don't need it.
I know I don't. Actually, when I go somewhere, I used to go visit some of the old timers, and some of them had lost their sight, Louise Steele, and I'd go to her house and knock on the door and say, "Hey Louise, it's me," and she'd say, "Oh Susie, come on in." So see, people knew who I was, and Frank Straw told my husband once that I was the only person in this damn town that he could hear. I don't know how many of you knew who Frank Straw was. He was another character. Oh, there's just so many great characters around here. One afternoon, just for the heck of it, I sat at my computer and started listing the ones that I had interviewed or that I knew of. I mean, there's just, I bet I had 70 different people that have, a lot of them are gone, I'm sorry to say. So anyhow, let me tell you how the Friskies got their ranch. This is what Gus told me. And he may have told somebody else a different story, but Gus said that his dad had a freight business that he freighted to Leadville. This was in 1870, before the railroads and stuff. And that on the way up to Leadville, I don't know whether he had to run away or what, but he was killed. And so the freight business was gone, and the boys, there were 9 kids at one time, but only I think 4 or 5 lived to adulthood. And the mother didn't want to run the freight business, and either a preacher or a priest, and Gus couldn't remember which because he didn't like either one, talked his mother into trading this freight business for this ranch at the base of Mount Princeton, which Gus said was worthless. All it was is rocks. You couldn't grow anything, trees and rocks. Well, no, it's mostly big ponderosa trees. But Gus never did like religious people because his mother got cheated, and yet this is one of the most beautiful spots in the valley. But at the time, it wasn't that good. So while Kelly's leased it, Bryce and his brother would fix all the fences and stuff, and evidently when the Friskies had it, they didn't keep up the fences too good because they ate out on all the forest land, which was, you know, fine for them, then they didn't have to feed them so much. Otto Frisky, the one who went to prison for rustling cattle, he ended up marrying a woman, and let me see if I can think of her name. If I can't, I've got it in here. She married a woman named Mary Devine. And they had 3 daughters, Mary Josephine, Maud Agnes, and Oddie Devine. And he eventually left the Maxwell Creek Ranch and settled down by Centerville. That's where the girls all went to school. And Gus never told me that he rustled cattle. He said he got wrongly accused. We all got wrongly accused of picking up calves. And you know, if there's a lost calf and it doesn't have a mother, somebody needs to take it anyhow. One of Gus's brothers, Ernie, was he the younger brother, Joe? I can't remember where he was.
I don't know how they were.
Well, anyhow, Gus said he could have been in the baseball league. He could have played for the Yankees. He was that good. Because he practiced all the time, he threw rocks at prairie dogs, and he could nail them. And then he went and he played in a baseball team over in Fairplay, I think is where Gus said. And he really was, I guess, pretty good, but he got hurt somehow, and he never did make a career of being a baseball player. And then Ernie died while Gus and he were the only 2 living at the ranch. And Gus told me he tried to get Ernie to go to the hospital because he knew he had pneumonia, but he was so damn stubborn he wouldn't go, and he just up and died. So I tell you, the story's just the Frisky brothers we could probably tell for quite a long time. And Joe, oh, see, Ada could tell a few because you ranched just below them for a while, didn't you?
Well, no.
And that extra ranch?
Glenn used to help him with branding and so forth.
Oh, okay. See, everybody in this group, you have stories to go with the stories. I have the stories, not too many first-hand ones, but I've certainly talked to a lot of old-timers who've told me all these stories.
Some of them I don't want you to repeat.
Oh, I tell you, some of the best stories I got, when we worked on the History of Chaffee County book that we did in 1982, that was the most fun. because you'd go talk to these old timers and they'd tell you things and then they'd say, turn that darn thing off because I want to tell you this and I don't want anybody to know. Well, the problem is there were still descendants around, for instance, Treves and Murrays and Morrison. So you had to be real careful, you know, that you didn't use their name. And I remember your aunt, Buena Feeling was his aunt, and she was one of the ones who had me turn off the machine because she and she wasn't talking about Frank. Anyhow, the Friskies ended up, they had 1,100 acres up there, and it's all been pretty much split up now, and different people have it, but it's still a beautiful spot up there. It's in the below the Maxwell Basin in there. It's just a gorgeous place.
Yeah, that place we had.
Yeah, you did have a place.
Right.
I had to remind Ada. I knew she had a place below that. Anyhow, we are all delighted. I'm speaking for the museum. I am so happy so many people came. I'm totally shocked because we didn't have enough chairs because we didn't expect all of you. So maybe if we can do this in the fall, we could even go to a bigger place or at least get some more chairs. So around a campfire. Thank you all for coming.
Can we sing happy birthday to you? Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, dear Ada. Happy birthday to you.
Dear Morrison. And I'm going to tell just kind of history of my husband and our ranch. My husband, Glenn Morrison, was born on his family's ranch, which is now the Ivy League Golf Course. The ranch was originally homesteaded by his grandfather, Hugh Mahan, in 1865. Glenn's parents, Clyde and Loretta Mahan Morrison, purchased the property, and Glenn later inherited it. We sold to Ivy League in 1971. The original name of the town was Mahanville, but it was later changed to Buena Vista. The lady who suggested the names requested that it be pronounced the American way, Buena Vista, instead of the Spanish Buena Vista. Most of the natives are quite upset when it is mispronounced.
We found that out.
I was born in my grandparents' house in Florence and grew up at Nathrop. I went to school in the little white schoolhouse through the 8th grade and then came to Buena Vista High School in this very building. Excuse me, got a frog. At the time I went to the Nathrop School, and for several years after, there were a number of rural schools, and about every weekend there was a dance at one or the other of them, and that was our recreation and social time. We'd all make it to these different dances. Glenn and I were married in 1942, and at that time he ran a dairy, milking about 40 cows. He delivered milk around town, and there were 2 grocery stores in town that sold Morrison dairy milk. My job was to help bottle the milk, and after the delivery there were about 100 glass quart bottles to wash. We received 12 cents a quart for our milk. After World War II, we sold the dairy business and the cows to my dad, Lester Morgan, and my brother, Ted Morgan. Glenn purchased some Hereford cattle from his brother-in-law, Frank's dad, and summered them on forest land east of Granite. Glenn also raised 10 acres of the best head lettuce you can imagine. The seed was called New York Wonderful and was much tastier and sweeter than the iceberg lettuce we have to buy today. Jim Close tried to find the seed but can't find a catalog that has it listed. Glenn would plant the seed about the middle of June, and it would be ready to harvest by Labor Day, when the Head Lettuce Day celebration was held. Some of the ranchers would furnish beef to be barbecued, and there was always a big wedge of lettuce with homemade mayonnaise on the plate. Then this was served free to anyone that came to the celebration. The lettuce was cut and packed in crates and then taken to the packing sheds in town to be trimmed and repacked. The shed was on North Railroad Street, where the all-around tire shop is now. While they were still harvesting ice at the ice lake west of town, railroad carloads were shipped all over the country, refrigerated by the ice. There were several other people raising lettuce also, but we were about the last ones to quit. In later years, the lettuce was shipped by truck to the larger cities on Front Range. We had several people that had truck farms in Denver that would come up with their own trucks and haul it out to sell in their farmers markets. One person that we knew was Tommy Johns. One year at the end of the harvest, Glenn and Shep White, a man who was our hired hand, were cutting the last half acre. Tommy came and wanted to buy that last of it in the field. Tommy kept trying to buy it as cheaply as possible, and Glenn and Shep kept on cutting. Finally, Tommy handed Glenn a $1,000 bill, and the deal was closed.
Tell him who Tommy Johns was.
Well, I will, I don't care. It was the first and probably the last $1,000 bill I ever saw. There were no banks in town at that time, and I didn't know what to do to keep it safe. So I decided to put it in a freezer box and put it way down in the deep freeze, figuring that even if the house caught on fire, it would be safe. I took it to the First National Bank in Salida the next morning. This is one of Kelly's favorite stories. Tommy Johns came back to Buena Vista, and he and his wife Mabel had a restaurant, first in the Green Parrot, and later built the restaurant which is now the Buffalo Bar and Grill. Their name at that time was Tommy and Mabel Gianelli when they came back to Buena Vista. People from town would come out to help in the fields and then go to the lettuce sheds to something anyhow. Anyhow, they packed it at night. A lot of these workers were from the reformatory. During World War II, it was hard to find local labor, as many of the people were either in the service or gone to work in factories connected with the war. A couple of summers, the reformatory sent out a crew of inmates to thin and hoe the lettuce. There were probably 6 to a crew, and Dinger Hills was the guard that usually came with them. I had to feed them at noon, and one day, I remember well, I had fixed a big pot of stew. When they walked in and asked what was for dinner, and I told them stew, their faces fell a mile. But after they took a few bites, they decided it was quite a bit better than what they were used to eating at the reformatory. Well, we finally quit the lettuce business because it was hard to find the people to work because they were used to the higher wages in the factories and so forth. And California had cheaper labor because of the immigrant workers and the longer growing season. But we raised heads that were like that big, and they'd put about 3 dozen in a crate, and we'd sell them for maybe $3 or $3.50 a crate. And you just can't imagine how much better it was. Anybody that grew lettuce up here in the mountains knew how much more flavorful it was.
It was called Buena Kiss lettuce. Buena Kiss.
Buena Kiss. Don't say Buena.
How long?
Not Buena and not Buena.
Yeah. How late did you raise head lettuce? What was the last year?
I should have asked Jimmy Close. I think it was around 1950 something.
Okay.
Because Clyde came back from the service and he would come up in the summers and help Glenn. And Jimmy and Close and Tommy Armstrong would come.
Did you make Jerry work in the lettuce fields?
Well, he wasn't very big about the time we sold. He and Glenda used to pick worms, though, and sell them.
Glenda did it. Jerry was no help?
I ate one.
Oh, okay.
I worked with one fall out of cutting lettuce, cutting lettuce in half,
Yeah.
and that 10 acres looked like 100.
Yeah, we had a lot of young people came out and worked, and some of the older people also. It was,
I want you to tell about Shep White.
oh,
Shep White, she told me this story the other day when I was visiting with her, and Shep White was an old guy that lived around here, and he was quite a heavy drinker. And I knew him as an 8, 9-year-old kid because he came to my folks' house, which was Pinion Court, and drank with my father, who also was a heavy drinker. And Shep White, I didn't know this, but he worked for Ada and Glenn, so tell us the story.
well, he worked for us for a lot of years, and as Susie says, he liked to drink pretty near every weekend. He'd go to town and get pretty drunk. And one morning, Glenn and I were looking out the window, and somebody dropped him off across the city ditch that ran through our property. He kept trying to make that bridge, and every time he'd get to it, he'd go to one side or the other, almost fall in. Finally, he got down on his hands and knees and crawled across that bridge. And then another funny story was because he drank so much, and our daughter, Glenda, was about 4 years old, and she went to Sunday school pretty near every year, Sunday, and she said to him, got up on his lap one day, and she said to him, "You know, Shep, what you need to do is go to Sunday school." He said, "I don't need any kid telling me what to do."
Thank you.
I'm Betty Farrington, and I'm not a native around here. I moved here in 1932 end of the Depression, and this will be about my high school years here from 1932 to 1936. But to preface that, question Ada, was your milk pasteurized? No. Reason I asked is when we were at the Hayden Ranch, somebody complained I was giving it to a friend in Leadville, and I complained, so Bill had to buy a pasteurizer. So anyway, that's why I asked that. That's off the list. Okay. As I came up the stairs, I had to think of something else. We started high school here, 35, 36. But I'm out of order, and I digress, as my daughter would say. But coming up the stairs, I remembered Harry Tinsley was one of our teachers, an excellent teacher. And he went to work at the reformatory, and then he became warden of the prison in Canyon City. But we had a reunion at Jump Steady out Cottonwood Hot Springs here a number of years ago, and I remember Harry Tinsley getting up and saying, Bill Beswick, and I'll talk about him more later, wherever you are, I hope you forgive me for throwing you down the stairs. Talk about, nowadays, okay? I think that
call him Beetleback?
I don't know where that came from, that Beetleback, Bill Bez. Oh, I don't know, Chuck. Yeah, we had nicknames. My brother, Sidney Wilson, was called Cracker Ass, but what I tell you. Okay. I gave him, I've got notes, but I'm going to try to, so I don't, give Greg, who was editor of what they then called the Chaffee County Republican, rather than Chaffee County Times, used the term halcyon days and the halcyon days of yore. And one came to mind for me was bucolic, because bucolic was kind of a pastoral setting, rural setting, right? But anyway, now it's back in the day. So this is back in the day, okay, about 75 to 80 years ago, and mainly my memories of school years here, from 32 to 36. If we only get up to my sophomore year, you guys are in trouble, okay? Forget that. Yeah, okay. About Buena Vista then, as I remember it, the population was about 900. Am I clear, guys? I hate my back to you. Okay, the population of the town was about 900. High school, we had about 75 kids. And I heard on the radio the other day, or read in an article, 278 now. In our graduating class, as a senior class, there were 17 of us, which was the largest graduating class they'd ever had in Buena Vista up till that day. That was 1936. The 8th grade, when I moved here, I was in the 8th grade, and there were 27 in the 8th grade. The streets, as somebody said, were primarily dirt. There were a few sidewalks, then as now, not too many sidewalks, right? There were irrigation ditches all along the streets, all throughout town. So that's where they got all those pretty cottonwood trees and so forth. But I well remember all the irrigation ditches along every street. And I don't remember street names. We just said so-and-so lived next to so-and-so. But they did have street names. There were arc lights. We called them arc lights, A-R-C, on not every corner, but some corners. And the kids would play out under the arc lights at night. The houses in town, not too many had indoor plumbing. There were privies, and the ones that did have indoor plumbing, they had cesspools, right? Story about that one time, Venla Farrington went out back and the cesspool was dug up and she fell in it. That's my sister-in-law. Not too many telephones. You'd call the operator, and if the line was busy, somebody's on the line. Of course, kids, where are the kids? Are you still awake? No dials or anything like that. Ice and milk were delivered to the homes. People had ice boxes. And Foreman's, I know, was one, and I don't know who delivered the milk. Or they delivered milk, and I don't know who delivered, no, they delivered the ice. Foreman's delivered the ice, that's right. There were 2 grocery stores at that time in town. Perschbacher's was on the corner of Railroad Street and Main Street, where the video place is now. That was Perschbacher's store. And then there was up about where the, dare I say the word, medical marijuana place is now. Okay, that was, I think it was the red and white store at that time.
And it was a grocery store called the Red and White?
I think it was red and white, but it changed, wasn't there? And then it changed names later.
Well, it was Safeway.
Was it, well, maybe, but it seemed to me that red and white, but I don't know which was first.
I have a picture where it says Red and White store, and I didn't know what it was. Now I know.
Okay, and that's about where it was. Yeah. Doc Schaefer had the drugstore, and I think maybe that was about part of the lariat toward the town hall was where Doc Schaefer's drugstore was, in my memory, I'm not sure. And they called the druggist Doc, so it was Doc Schaefer. He built Dixie Horse big house. Doc Schaefer did. But I digress. The hotels, the big Mount Princeton Hotel, what on? Oh, my hand, I'm sorry, talking with my hands. Mount Princeton Hotel has burned down, and it was by Town Lake there, big 3-story hotel, where the Lakeside Motel is now, thanks Susie. And then there was the Yale Hotel, and that was down the street, whatever it is. The post office was where the REMAC is now, okay? And that street, and then there was a Yale Hotel there. I think the building is still there. You can see the outline of it. And then on down was where the community church is, behind Bev Stitchery. Okay, and then there was the Webb Hotel, and that was on down Main Street, all over the place. Where Mothers? That's right, you're right, okay. The library was in the community building, and that's where your depot is now, by Town Lake. And it was called, the community building had 2 sides to it. And one side was the library, and Josie Foreman, Jake's mother, volunteered in the library. The other side was kind of a community hall. I remember dances there. These were the Great Depression years, or the end of the Great Depression. FDR was starting his programs. So they had a WPA, Work Progress Administration for men, and I don't know what projects they did. And then the women did some sewing. And that was in the back of where the town hall is now. The bank had folded. And I remember the women who were working for one of FDR's programs working there. And then the CCC camp was up Trout Creek, back toward Bass End, Joe, right? You know what the CCC camp was, guys? Stay away, Betty.
Civilian Conservation Camp.
That's right. And they brought young men in from all over the country to work, and they did rehab work on Trout Creek. Joe, you can still see the dams. Go ahead.
I was by yesterday, and the building still stands that was the main part of that.
Of the CCC
You
camp?
talked of an outhouse.
18-holer, an 18-holer, right?
And it's a 16-holer.
16-holer. Is it still there? Yeah. Well, the town girls kind of liked it because all these young men came to town to the dances, and a few of them married them too, as I remember. So that was the CCC camp. But they did a lot of good work, flood damage and so forth, up Trout Creek, and I'm sure other areas too. Oh yes, about Buena Vista then, this is the end of this section, there weren't any deer in town then. You went up the mountain to find them. Okay, that's page 1.
And there weren't any deer because there was no dog rules, and the dogs ran all over, and the deer just didn't come into town. You had to drive up into the mountains of Trout Creek or up 4 Mile to find a deer.
Or up on Mount Princeton.
Now you just have to go in your backyard.
Cottonwood. Okay.
Oh, did they? Oh, the Turners. Cliff says the Turners at the Turner Farm had a pet deer.
Yeah, we had one at the Hayden Ranch too. Yeah. Oh, and I think Gary Merrifield's had one too, didn't they?
Yeah, but that's just only 20 years ago.
Oh well, you know, what can I tell you? Okay, my family members were my father and mother, Art and Vera Wilson, and my brother Sid Wilson. And my grandmother lived with us because she'd been widowed. And our first house was on Lake Street where Ruby, Dr. Van Buskirk, just recently lived. So that was our first house we rented, and no indoor plumbing and colder than you know what. But I was in the 8th grade, the last part of the 8th grade, and I remember it well. We ice skated on Town Lake. They didn't drain it then, and they weren't going to be afraid of being sued. And we also swam in it in the summer in Town Lake. And they had the barbecue from Lettuce Days out in the street in front of the house there, where we lived. I remember that well too, that Ada talked about. Then the second house we lived in was on Railroad Street, east side of the 2-story log house on Cottonwood Creek, South Bank. Got it?
Still there?
Yeah, oh yeah, it's a big boat, and I think one of the local lawmakers lives there.
John Cummings lives there.
Okay, the 2-story log house, okay. Anyway, we rented that about my middle of my freshman year, I guess, and lived there, and that was colder than you know what, too. And in the Lake Street house, we did have inside toilet and wash basin. In that log house, there was no inside plumbing. Guess where the privy was? Out over Cottonwood Creek. All through town, they had privies out over the creek. You can guess what it looked like by springtime, you know? But they said that water purified itself in 100 yards.
Because when the high water comes down, it cleans up.
Washed it all away. Okay, well, we didn't live there too long, and then the last house we lived in was on Cedar Street in Verna Allinger's house, second house from the corner there. Had a nice big front porch at that time. It doesn't have now. We had sleepovers on the front porch. They would call it a sleepover now. And I remember Mabel Lalonde, the old lady on the corner, in the hot summer night, one hot summer night, damn kids, and down slammed the window because we were out on the front porch having a sleepover. So anyway, that's my homes. How my time going, guys? Now to school. Okay, the old school building was where the Catholic Church is now, as most of you know. And I walked to school, and most of the kids walked to school. I think the country kids had to drive and get themselves somewhere. There were no buses, right? And the classes downstairs were first and second grade in one room, third and fourth in another, fifth and sixth in another. You went up the stairs, and the 7th and 8th grades were on one side. My directions aren't right, but anyway. And then the high school was on the other side, just as it was when we moved down here. Everything's right here. High school up here, though, and all the other grades downstairs. And that was in 35, 36, I believe. And I'm out of my order here. Mrs. Ayers was our 8th grade teacher. She was the wife of Dr. Ayers. There were 2 doctors in town, Dr. Close and Dr. Ayers. Okay, and Mrs. Ayers, there were 27 8th graders, and I don't know how many 7th graders. Imagine having that many 7th and 8th graders in one room and trying to teach them all. She was a good teacher. But this is her welcome to my brother and I when we came to school here. Just because some of us are from the big cities, we don't need to think we're better than anybody else. I remember that. But she was a good teacher, and had to be. And let's see, another memory of about that time was walking home to lunch, and somebody that some of you here might remember, I met my first cowboy. We were walking home, another girl and I were walking home to lunch, and this cowboy on a horse rode by, and he stopped and talked, and this other girl introduced me to him, and he flung his leg over the saddle horn, and cowboy. Can anyone guess who it was? Squanto. Squanto man.
Squanto man.
One of the mayors. He was a real live cowboy. Okay, on to, let's see. Oh, in all that 7th and 8th classes, there were relatives of every one of you guys here. For example, Ada's sister Dorothy was in that class. And Dorothy's here tonight. She's my age. And let's see, we had the Ruby. Did I lose something? Ruby was in the 7th grade. And Frank's sister Margaret, or mother Margaret Morrison, was in my class. And Ruby I got, and Joe's sister. Joe has 3 sisters who are nuns. Sister nuns, they're sisters. And his oldest sister, Amelia, was in that class with me. Who'd I miss? Frank, I got Margaret, Ruby, Ada's sister. I'm not sure about Mr. Pierce here. There were some Pierces here, but Ada tells me it was a different family. Ada tells me that the Pierce family that I remember was a different family. A different family from yours. Different. Oh, and, okay, another one, and how can I forget this? Mike Perry isn't here, I don't think, but you all know Kathy. All right, Mike Perry's mother was in that class. She was Esther Mosier, and her sister, Ruth Mosier, was in the 7th grade, who became Ruth Paquette, okay? I'm sure all of you people that I don't know are fascinated by this. So anyway, most of the people here tonight, there was a Phil Pierce. No Phil Pierce in your family? And a beautiful girl, too. He's not hearing this. Okay, the teachers in high school, there were 4 teachers in the high school, and I think that we only had 4 all through high school when we moved to this building. But 4 teachers handling all the subjects. And you had to have 16 credits to graduate, 16 full credits, so that meant you were taking 4 full-time credits a year. There were 4 years of Latin. Mr. McGinnis was a Latin teacher. You had to take Latin 1. And I think they had to take Caesar the 2nd year. I'm not sure if that was required or not. And then the 3rd and 4th years, they alternated for the juniors and seniors. 1 year it was Cicero, and the other one was Virgil, and put the juniors and seniors in alternated grades. So, well, anyway, that's the Latin deal, and then the 4 teachers covered everything else. Let's get us on to... oh no, see, I didn't even get the initiation. I think, and you kids, if you're still awake, just listen to this. Talk about bullying. When we were initiated into high school, there was a whole week of initiation. And every day when you came to school or went out for recess or went home, all the upperclassmen, the girls had switches and the boys had paddles. And you had to run the gauntlet going in and out of the school for a week. The end of the week you had an initiation Friday afternoon, and you had to do embarrassing things and have on the one I remember is put on a blindfold and eat worms, and that was cooked spaghetti, of course. But that night the reward was they had a steak fry out at up toward 4 Mile. Wild Horse. Oh, wow. Wild Horse, just across the bridge going up toward the tunnels. Okay, we had a steak fry. And I don't know if it was steak or who provided it, or if it was really steak or not. But everyone wanted to go, and the alumni were there too. But one of the things you had to do when you got there, you had to get down on your hands and knees and crawl through the line of the alumni and everyone holding these paddles and switches. Well, you can imagine what happened to the Bill Beswicks and the Sid Wilsons and the Bud Dobbinses and Wayne Poppins at that. But Balney's mother and I, Esther Mosier, we had to walk to get out there to this darn steak fry. No rides or anything, clear out up toward the bridge across Cottonwood. But we took her, Esther's little brother's diapers and put them in our pants so that when we had to go through that, they weren't going to hurt us then. I only just got through the freshman year, guys.
You know what? I promise we'll have you back.
No, I know. I didn't get to the high school sports, the pep club, the Orpheum Theater. Oh,
I'm going to get my Larry out on you.
I know. I'm sorry.
Thank you. Oh, well, thank you so much to all you folks. That's terrific. Thank you. Well, we're going to finish up the last part of the night here with the youngster here, Chuck Knocktree.
Well, as everybody knows, I'm Chuck Knocktree, Charles Henry Knocktree IV, actually. My great-grandfather is the one that founded Nathrop. And looking at these stories, looking at these, I feel like the young pup trapped up on the porch here. And I'm gonna graciously bow out. I just feel overwhelmed here. And I'm gonna let an old timer, call up an old timer and let him take over for me. So anyway, and I see people looking around and everybody's even got a gray hair singing, well, I hope it's not me. Anyhow, well, beautiful ladies, distinguished gentlemen. The young whippersnapper there, he wanted me to take over and talk a little bit about his great-grandfather. Well, I first ran into old Charlie Knoxtree back in 1859 there at Denver City. I had a saloon and he had a dry goods store across the street from me. We got to be pretty good friends, by golly. He was an enterprising young man, hard worker, never met anybody that worked any harder. Well, we heard about the gold strike at California Gulch, so we came on down, set up there at Oro City. And he set up his store, and I set up my saloon and parlor, gambling hall. And we did really downright good. Well, Charlie had been coming down to the valley here, and he had his eye on some land and whatnot around Chalk Creek, because he had plans to homestead and put in a grist mill. Now, he didn't come by that by just out of the clear blue sky. Back in the old country, he was 3 generations that they had a grist mill, run a mill there. So anyway, Charlie, during this time, he got to be friends with the Ute Indians who camped on the north side of the Chalk Creek up there on the hill. And him and Chief Ure had quite a friendship going. And the way Nathrop transformed from Knocktree, well, the German Knocktree, even to read it was hard to pronounce anyway, and the Indians had a terrible time. Hey, Charles, Knocktree. And it come out kind of Knocktree or whatever, and it morphed into Nathrop. And actually when he named the town, and it was, what do you call it? Made a town, organized. There's a name for it, but I can't remember it right now. And he kind of liked that because it was a little bit of Indian in there. Not a lot of people know this, you see. And in 1865, he went ahead and filed for the land, come down and built his house, built his store, and he built a sawmill. And as the railroads came in, he wound up with about 5 sawmills. He built a hotel, he built a depot, everything. I think he built about everything but a church, and maybe he did that too. Anyway, I would go back and forth down to the valley and go to Taos every spring and every fall. And I'd pick up a load of whiskey and mezcal and tequila, of course, and then I'd get some of that fancy French, what do they call it, champagne. And a couple cases of cognac, because I'd take the champagne and I would sell it to the madams, and I would give them some cognac for their little private stock, because they had kind of acquired a taste for it. And I didn't charge them for it, but it all worked out. But, of course, that's another story for another day. Well, he had quite a sense of humor. And I come in this one time, I was coming back up from the valley there and stopped, and he come up to me and he says, "Old timer," he said, "you'll never guess what I did." And he had this funny look on his face, and I said, "Well, I give up." "What'd you do?" And those other days, this young feller comes up, and he had a team of horses he was stringing along. And I seen those horses coming out that he was pulling, and I said, "Man, that's a good-looking team." And he says, "I See him out the window there, I put some money in my pocket. And I went out, I told that fella, I said, that's a nice looking set of horses you got there. He says, I'll give you $100 for them right now. And the young fellow says, well, they're yours. So I handed him the $100, shook his hand, and he gave me kind of a funny look, shrugged his shoulders, and got on his horse and rode off. I called old Hank. I said, Hank, he was a man who worked for us there. I said, take care of these horses and put them in the corral. What do you think? I just bought these. Nice looking team. And he looked at him, he says, well, Mr. Nathrop, I think that young fella that you loaned that team of horses to a couple of weeks ago, I think you just bought your own horses back. And then Hank says, well, are you going to go get the money for them? I says, well, no. I mean, I bought them fair, I bought them fair and square. He told me they were mine. I says, the young fella didn't do nothing wrong, so I'm just going to let her skate on by. And then, it wasn't too long after that, I was coming up from the valley, and I stopped in Swatch. And I had a partner there that we ran a saloon and whatnot. And anyhow, I come in, it's kind of a sad story here. I come in and old Joaquin, he says, old timer, did you hear about old Charlie Knoxville? And right away I thought, something wrong there. And I said, no, what? And he says, here, let me give you the paper. Would you hold this for me, please? You have to bear with me while I read this because I run out of wind now and then. But the Swatch Chronicle, October 7th, 1881. And it reads, the heading, Murder Most Foul. From the Leadville Herald, the 5th of this month, we learned of one of the most cold-blooded and dastardly murders that has ever been our sad duty to chronicle. The crime is rendered the most outrageous by the prominence of the victim, who was one of the most respected citizens of our state and universally popular wherever known. The name Charles Knoxville was synonymous with fair dealing, uneasy industry, and successful effort, and his death, which occurred last Monday night at his store in Nathrop, Colorado, by the shot of a despicable villain, has deprived this section of Colorado of an upright and honorable citizen, and many of the residents of Swatch of a loved and trusted friend. His murderer's name is Bert Remington, and by profession he was a cattle herder. A short time ago, Remington engaged an employee of Knoxville to join the cattle herders in the South, and on Monday he came up for his wages. Well, he arrived at Nathrop during the afternoon and spoke to a number of men in the town about his pay. He offered to hire himself out to Mr. Gribb, providing that the latter would pay him $50 a month. Well, this figure was higher than usual, the average wage being $35. His services were declined. He then informed Mr. Gribb that his present employer, Mr. Knoxville, was paying $50 a month. And upon the listener saying that he thought there was some mistake about it, the villain retorted that he was going to get that sum anyhow, that he was compelled to leave one place that he worked for killing his boss about wages, and he would repeat the operation if he had to now. Well, such a threat seemed so entirely useless and uncalled for that Mr. Gribb thought the man certainly had no idea of carrying it into execution. Hence, he paid no heed to it. During the evening, the victim with his wife were sitting in the store till about 9 o'clock when the wife retired for the night. About a half hour later, Remington came in and supposed made a demand for his exorbitant pay, whereupon being refused, he pulled a revolver and shot his employer. The ball entered in the right side of his chest, plowing through the body and embedding itself a quarter of an inch from the surface under the right shoulder blade, about 4 or 5 inches from the spine. Well, the sound of the pistol broke on to the still night air. The men who happened to be in the neighboring stores and saloons rushing out into the darkness only to see Remington get on his horse and ride off into the country. Well, not knowing the nature of the crime, little attention was paid to the fleeing criminal. But soon the sheriff was in pursuit. The wounded man was found lying on the floor, fatally shot, never uttering a sound, but dying within 10 minutes. But some of the men who first on the ground stated that they did hear Mr. Knocktrick explain, "Oh my God, he has shot me." And with that note, I often wondered just how different the valley would have been if my old friend Charles hadn't been put away, taken away so soon. Anyway, I'm going to give you back to the young man now.
I mentioned he was 46 years old.
He was 48.
48?
Yep. Born in 1933.
You gonna play us a song?
Yes. They say that, well, Horace Tabor came down and the funeral procession had his brass band, and they said there was hardly ever a funeral procession before or since that would match up to that one.
Where was?
At Nathan, at the cemetery there. It's the only tombstone in Chautauqau County that has murdered on it. Anyway, I would like to go ahead and do a song called Cowboy's Land. Well, as I walk out in the streets of Laredo, as I walked out in Laredo one day, well, I spied a young cowboy all wrapped in white linen, all wrapped in white linen, as cold as the clay. For I can see by your outfit that you are a cowboy. These words he did say as I boldly walked by. Come sit down beside me and hear my sad story. For I'm shot in the breast and I know I must die. Well, there's once in the saddle I used to go dashing. There was once in the saddle I used to go gay. It was first to the drown house and then to the card house. For I was shot in the breast, now I'm dying today. Did 6 jolly cowboys to carry my coffin. Did 6 pretty maidens to carry my pall. Throw bunches of roses all over my coffin. The roses to deaden the clouds as they fall. They'll beat the drum slowly and play the fife lowly, and play the death march as you carry me along. Well, take me to the Green Valley, there lay the sod o'er me. For I'm a young cowboy and I know I've done wrong. cup of cold water. Cool my parched lips, the cowboy then said. But when I returned, the spirit had left him. Gone to his maker, the cowboy was dead. Where we beat the drum slowly and we played the fife lowly, and we bitterly wept as we carried him along. For we all missed our comrade, so brave, young and handsome. We all loved our comrade, although he'd done wrong. Thank you.